Picture this. You are standing alone in a frozen, empty wasteland. No cities, no roads, no smoke rising from a fire somewhere in the distance. Just wind, bare rock, and snow-capped cliffs stretching out in every direction as far as you can see. You turn around, and through the haze, you can just barely make out a few other people distant, faint, almost like ghosts drifting across the plain. That image is not an exaggeration, and it is not fiction. At this exact moment in our species' history, that handful of faint, half-visible figures is almost all there is left of us. Because right now on the entire planet there are only around 1,000 people left who can still have children and keep the human species going. Not 1,000 in your country. Not 1,000 on your continent. 1,000 total on Earth. Every person who will ever be born after this point, every parent, every friend, every stranger you will ever meet, every name that will ever appear in a history book has to descend from this one small, freezing, dying handful of survivors. And the strangest, most unsettling part of all is that none of them know it. None of them know they are the last thread the entire future of humanity is hanging from. They are just trying to make it through today. This actually happened. And here is the part that should stop you cold. It is not the extinction event you think it is. It isn't Toba. It isn't the supervolcano everyone learned about in school. It's something far older, far more severe, and it was only confirmed in 2023, using genetic tools that didn't exist a decade ago. For years, the story everyone told about humanity's closest brush with extinction centered on one dramatic image, a supervolcano in Indonesia erupting 74,000 years ago, blotting out the sun, freezing the planet into a volcanic winter, and crushing the human population down to somewhere between 3,000 and 10,000 survivors. It's a great story. It's been repeated in documentaries, textbooks, and 1,000 YouTube videos. There's just one problem. It's probably wrong. And the real event, the one almost nobody talks about, was worse, stranger, and is still splitting the scientific community in half. Let's start with the discovery that changed everything. In 2023, a team of researchers published a paper in the journal Science that used a brand new method of analyzing human DNA called FITCoal, short for Fast Infinitesimal Time Coalescent Process. Instead of looking at fossils, which are rare and incomplete, FITCoal reconstructs population history directly from the genomes of living people. The team analyzed 3,154 modern human genomes, searching for the genetic fingerprints that a population crash leaves behind, because when a species nearly dies out, it leaves scars in the DNA of everyone who comes after, scars that can still be read hundreds of thousands of years later. This matters because FITCoal isn't just another statistical trick layered onto old data. It was specifically designed to detect short, sharp, severe population crashes, the kind older methods tended to smooth over or miss entirely. Earlier models were good at spotting long, gradual declines, but struggled with a fast, brutal squeeze, followed by a long, thin recovery. And when the team pointed FITCoal at nearly 3,000 human genomes, spanning populations across the globe, the signal it found wasn't subtle. It was one of the most dramatic population crashes ever reconstructed for any species, let alone our own. What they found didn't just add a second extinction event to the timeline. It dwarfed the one everyone already knew. According to the FITCoal analysis, somewhere between 930,000 and 813,000 years ago, the ancestors of every human alive today were reduced to roughly 1,280 breeding individuals. Not 1,280 people, total 1,280 individuals capable of reproducing, scattered across an unknown range, trying to keep a species alive on numbers you'd expect to find in a struggling population of mountain gorillas or Amur tigers. And this is where the number gets genuinely hard to process. Before this collapse, the ancestral human population is estimated to have been somewhere between 58,600 and 135,000 breeding individuals. After the collapse, 1,280. That's a loss of roughly 98.7% of the population. 98.7% of our ancestors simply vanished from the gene pool. Now, if this had lasted a few rough generations, a bad decade, a harsh winter, a run of famine, it would still be remarkable. But it didn't last a few generations. According to the study, this drastically shrunken population held on, teetering near collapse, for approximately 117,000 years. Stop and sit with that number for a second. The entire span of Homo sapiens as a species, every cave painting, every migration out of Africa, every civilization, every war, every book ever written fits inside roughly 100,000 to 300,000 years, depending on how you count it. This bottleneck alone lasted 117,000 years, longer than the whole recorded story of our species. 117,000 years of living on the genetic edge of the knife, and almost none of us ever knew it happened. To put that span in perspective, agriculture is roughly 12,000 years old. The pyramids of Giza were built about 4,500 years ago. Every major milestone of human civilization, farming, cities, writing, empires, industry, spaceflight fits several times over inside the length of this single bottleneck. For the entire duration of it, the number of people capable of carrying the species forward stayed low enough that a single bad season, a single disease, could plausibly have ended everything, generation after generation, without any of them knowing they were the last fragile link in a chain leading to everyone who would ever exist afterward. So what does a population bottleneck like this actually do to a species, besides almost erasing it? This is where the story stops being just a horror statistic and starts becoming an origin story. Researchers now suspect that this narrow population squeeze may be the exact moment that reshaped the human family tree. The timing lines up disturbingly well with the estimated split that led to the last common ancestor of Neanderthals, Denisovans, and modern humans. In other words, the tiny surviving population that made it through this bottleneck may be the same group that later branched off into multiple different human species. The very thing that almost killed us off may also be the reason there were ever Neanderthals and Denisovans to begin with. A near-extinction event and a species creation event happening in the same breath. And the bottleneck didn't just shape who we became, it appears to have shaped what we lost. One of the study's co-authors, Ziqian Hao, estimated that as much as 2/3 of human genetic diversity may have been wiped out during this event. That single fact solves a puzzle that's bothered biologists for decades. Humans, compared to almost every other primate species, have oddly low genetic diversity. Chimpanzees living in one forest can be more genetically different from each other than a person from Nigeria is from a person in Norway. For a long time, that was just a strange fact about our species. Now, there's a candidate explanation: we all descend from a genetic funnel, so narrow it flattened our diversity for good. Some researchers even argue this bottleneck may have influenced traits considered fundamental to modern humans, including the size and structure of the brain. There's another mystery this discovery might finally solve, one that has quietly frustrated paleoanthropologists for decades. Between roughly 950,000 and 650,000 years ago, the human fossil record across Africa and Eurasia goes strangely, almost eerily quiet. Very few remains, very few clues. For years, this gap was simply treated as bad luck. Fossils are rare, conditions for preservation are unpredictable, maybe we just haven't dug in the right place yet. But if the FITCoal findings are correct, the explanation might be much simpler and much bleaker. There was no gap in the searching, there was a gap in the people. When a population shrinks to roughly 1,000 breeding individuals and stays that way for over 100,000 years, there simply aren't enough bodies left behind to leave much of a fossil trail. The silence in the fossil record may not be an accident of preservation. It may be the sound of a species barely holding on. At this point, the story feels airtight. A near-total collapse? A 100,000-year survival crawl? A fossil gap finally explained? A species split possibly explained? A genetic mystery finally explained? It sounds like the kind of discovery that closes a chapter in human history for good. Except it doesn't. Because here's the detail almost no one puts in these videos, and it's the detail that turns this from a settled fact into a live scientific argument. The genetic signal behind this entire bottleneck shows up strongest almost exclusively in modern African populations. Population geneticist Janet Kelso has pointed out that this is genuinely strange because African and non-African human populations only split apart within roughly the last 100,000 years or so. If a population-wide bottleneck really happened between 813,000 and 930,000 years ago, long before that split, the genetic scar should show up roughly evenly in humans everywhere, African and non-African alike. Instead, the signal is lopsided. And in genetics, when your evidence doesn't distribute the way your theory predicts, that's not a footnote. That's a warning sign. That warning sign turned into open scientific pushback in 2024. A separate research team attempted to reproduce the original findings using a different analytical method, and they couldn't recreate the same result. Their conclusion was blunt. The supposed 900,000-year-old bottleneck may not have been a real historical event at all. It may be a statistical artifact, a pattern that looks exactly like a population crash in the math, without there ever having been an actual population crash in reality. As of right now, the scientific community is genuinely split down the middle on whether humanity's most extreme near-extinction event actually happened or whether it's an illusion produced by the very tools built to detect it. This is the part of the story that never makes it into the tidy version. Real science, at the edge of what we can know, doesn't hand you a clean answer wrapped in a bow. It hands you a live argument between researchers who are all looking at the same numbers and walking away with different conclusions. And if you think that controversy is unusual, wait until you hear what's happened to the extinction story everyone already assumed was settled. For decades, the Toba supervolcano eruption was treated as the closest call in the human story, a single catastrophic event 74,000 years ago, so violent it supposedly triggered a volcanic winter that crashed the human population down to somewhere between 3,000 and 10,000 survivors worldwide. The mental image is a vivid one. Ash blotting out the sun for years, global temperatures dropping by double digits, forests dying, small bands of surviving humans huddled together in a handful of refuges while the rest of the species starved in the dark. It's dramatic, it's cinematic, it's the version most people already know, repeated in textbooks and documentaries so many times that it hardened into something close to established fact. It's also, according to newer evidence, largely overturned. Sediment cores pulled from Lake Malawi in East Africa, along with archaeological evidence from cave sites in South Africa, tell a very different story. Researchers found no significant cooling event tied to the eruption, no mass die-off of vegetation that you'd expect from a volcanic winter severe enough to nearly wipe out humanity. At the archaeological sites themselves, there's no sign that Toba interrupted human habitation at all. If anything, the opposite happened. Occupation density at some sites actually increased in the period right after the eruption. The disaster that generations of people were taught nearly ended humanity may not have registered as a disaster to the humans who lived through it at all. So, if Toba wasn't the real crisis, and the 900,000-year bottleneck might be a statistical illusion, where does that leave us? There's a third possibility, and it might be the strangest one of all. A 2023 paper published in Nature, led by researcher Aaron Ragsdale and colleagues, proposes a model that doesn't look anything like a single population crash. Instead of one small group of humans nearly going extinct together, this model suggests our ancestors may have existed as multiple loosely connected populations, scattered and semi-isolated, continuously exchanging genes with each other over enormous stretches of evolutionary time. The unsettling part is this. That kind of structured population, fragmented, drifting apart, and merging back together over hundreds of thousands of years, can produce a genetic signal that looks almost identical to a real population bottleneck, even if population numbers never actually dropped to dangerous levels at any single point in time. In other words, it's possible there was never one dramatic near-extinction moment at all. It's possible the story is quieter and, in its own way, even stranger. Not a single group of humans clinging to survival by their fingernails, but a loose patchwork of small, scattered populations drifting toward each other and apart again for hundreds of thousands of years, until eventually all of that scattered wandering somehow produced everyone alive today. Maybe there was a single group of barely 1,000 people who saved the entire future of humanity. Maybe there wasn't, and the truth is a slower, messier story about fragmented populations never truly disappearing, just spreading thin. Right now, nobody can tell you with certainty which of these versions is correct. That's not a flaw in the science. That's what science actually looks like while it's still being done, not a finished monument, but an ongoing argument, conducted in the open by people willing to say we're not sure yet, instead of pretending they already know. But whichever version turns out to be true, one number is not in dispute. At some point in humanity's past, whether through one brutal squeeze or many overlapping ones, the population of our ancestors sank low enough that, viewed through modern eyes, we would qualify as one of the most endangered large mammals on Earth. The researchers behind the 2023 study made this comparison directly. The surviving population size they calculated is comparable to the population counts of critically endangered mammal species today. If a conservationist in the present day were handed those population figures with no context, they wouldn't be looking at a thriving, dominant species destined to inherit the planet. They'd be looking at a species on a watch list. a species one bad year away from gone. Think about what that actually means. Every person who has ever lived, every empire, every language, every song, every idea, everything you've ever loved or built or lost, all of it traces back through a genetic bottleneck so narrow that, at the time, an outside observer would have given us terrible odds. Not because of a meteor, not because of a war, just because, for reasons we still don't fully understand and may never fully agree on, our numbers fell to a level that should have been the end of the story. It wasn't the end. Somehow, through 117,000 years of scarcity, through isolation, through whatever combination of luck and resilience got a scattering of ancestors through to the other side, the line held. Barely. Quietly. With no fossils left behind to prove it happened, and depending on which scientists you ask, maybe not even leaving a signal we can fully trust today. Every one of us is descended from whoever made it through that century-long 100,000-year crawl. Every argument you've ever had, every home you've ever built, every child anyone has ever raised exists because a genetic thread thinner than anyone alive can properly picture didn't snap. We came far closer to disappearing than almost anyone realizes, and the unsettling part isn't just how close it was. It's that scientists are still arguing about how close, using tools built to read the past out of the blood in our own veins, and even those tools can't fully agree on what they're seeing. There's something almost humbling about that uncertainty. We tend to think of extinction as something that happens to other species studied from a safe distance in fossil records and documentaries about creatures less fortunate than us. It's easy to forget the same genetic machinery that nearly failed 1,000 other species ran through our own ancestors too, and came within a percentage point or two of failing the same way. No comet did this. No war did this. No predator did this. Whatever combination of climate, isolation, and sheer chance narrowed our numbers down to a group smaller than a single small town today, it very nearly finished the job without leaving behind one dramatic event for later generations to point to and say, that's what almost killed us. Just a long, quiet stretch of scarcity written into the DNA of everyone who came after. The mice in a similar kind of story didn't get a say in what happened to them. We did. Whatever combination of chance and grit carried a few thousand, or maybe a few scattered groups of a few thousand human ancestors through 100,000 years of near annihilation, it worked. It's still working. The question the scientists are really arguing about isn't just how close we came. It's how thin the line was between everything that has ever happened in human history and nothing happening at all.